Yeah, yeah, yeah. I am singularly honored to be the part of the organizing team of this 3-day international virtual conference on Indigenous Studies. Thank you, Regan Silvest, the president of Cape Cameroon, for putting your trust in me and giving me this opportunity to be part of this global discourses on Indigenous studies. I welcome you all to the technical session. Welcome all the paper presenters. You will be having 10 minutes for your presentation. Please mute and only the paper presenter can unmute. So I welcome you all from Aurangabad, Maharashtra state, India. So to begin with, may I invite Dr. Shafia, and she is assistant professor, Department of English, Amar Singh College, Srinagar, UT of Jammu and Kashmir, India. And the title of her presentation is Centralizing the Marginal, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart as an Indigenous Novel. So, Dr. Shafia, is she there?
Yes, I'm
Hello?
here. Audible?
Yeah, yeah, now you're audible. You may begin with your presentation. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, am I audible? Hello?
Yeah, yeah, you are audible, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Good
Hello.
afternoon.
You're
Good
audible,
af-
ma'am.
Okay, afternoon, everyone. My paper has both theoretical part and application part. I will begin with the theoretical part. The title of my paper uses the term indigenous novel as an unproblematic category. Standard set of terms always have a danger of being used with authenticity. We presume that they are neat, definite, known, and understood by everyone. But that is not always the case. Although in past 2 decades, indigenous studies have gained a strong hold in academics, but nevertheless, the terms indigenous peoples and indigenous literatures are very problematic. When we talk of indigenous people as a natural or original inhabitants of a region, it looks like a neat concept and gives us license to put all the indigenous people in one watertight category, with no regard for their ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and regional diversity. Verily, indigenous studies are criticized for its essentialism. Essentialism is also responsible for perpetuating stereotypical images and notions of indigenous people. Sherman Alexie is of the view that fundamentalism about Indian identity and what Indian can be and mean the native Indians. Today, more and more indigenous people are losing touch with their native, rigid, and unique culture as they are migrating to cities where they face such new issues as poverty, unemployment, drug abuse, violence that are not strictly related to indigenous culture and identity. When it comes to the indigenous literatures, we face similar theoretical hurdles. Thomas King, a Cherokee Indian, tersely defines indigenous literature as literature produced by natives, and edits, provided we resisted the temptation of defining who a native is. Does it suffice to consider diverse literatures coming from Aboriginals, Maori, First Nations, Native Americans, or Adivasis as indigenous literatures? In this context, one of the important questions is that, and I quote, how does one determine what is indigenous literature without relying on the identity or region of the author? That is, without going outside the text and using paraliterary criteria to establish a literary category. Unquote. Given the fact that it is hard to theorize about indigenous people and their literatures, there are no specific critical theories available to us with which to approach indigenous literatures. Although there is a firm consensus that the mainstream Western post-structuralist critical tools cannot do justice to indigenous literatures, there are no uniform indigenous critical methodologies to replace them. pertinent to mention that Ella Warrior, Weaver, and Craig Womack's notion of nationalistic criticism sought free evaluation of indigenous literatures on Western models of literary criticism, and instead emphasized reading it in the context of worldview, knowledge, and critical approaches. But in the long run, nationalist critical theory didn't gain ground as it was also attacked for essentialism. That said, I had to begin somewhere in order to read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart as an indigenous novel, and hence rely on some basic motifs that are found common in the indigenous literatures. The centrality of community and adherence to its values is one of the basic and shared features of indigenous literatures. Reverence, fair, and strict obedience to community and what it holds is important. Ancestors, separatist rituals, masculinity is a must. The idea that one is specific in the all-powering community looms large in indigenous literatures. In order to maintain harmony in community, one has to play the role assigned to them. Indigenous literatures revolve around the innate native experiences, worldview, knowledge, and culture. These elements bring in the humanity, insight, refinement, and organized social order of indigenous communities. The creative endeavors of indigenous writers are linked to give themselves an agency and a voice that was denied to them throughout history, and thus the political always impinges upon their literatures as they retell the brutal stories of oppression and subjugation by the majority non-indigenous or settler population. Crucial is also the depiction of the clash resulting from the interactions between indigenous and non-indigenous populations. Published in 1958, much before the other indigenous landmark works like Maria Campbell's Half-Breed in 1973, Janet Armstrong's Slash in 1985, or Carrie Hume's The Bone People in 1984, Things Fall Apart was first of its kind. A few pages into the novel, and the reader gets the realization of a complex societal structure and humanity of Igbo people. This provides a stark contrast to the vague, semi-human figures of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, dying languidly in the forest. Here we have Igbo people solidly set in impasto in vivid colors. Things Fall Apart more than anything else was consciously written by Chinua Achebe as a rejoinder to those Western works that had perpetuated a single story of an indigenous person. In the words of Daniel Heath Justice, they are portrayed as coming from an absence, a vacuum, a cultural vacuum, a moral vacuum, a civilization vacuum, that Africans are tabula rasa, culturally, historically, and even in terms of their basic humanity. And thus, in Things Fall Apart, Achebe was chiefly concerned with depicting Igbo culture as it enabled him not only to debunk the Western portrayal of Africans living in a state of tabula rasa, but also to centralize what was marginal or even unknown. One of the ways to do so was to foreground the richness of Igbo language in its proverbs, folklore, beauty, and oratory. Achebe writes, among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Interestingly, when Okoye comes to ask for his 200 cowries from Onoka, given long back to him, he doesn't blurt out the fact. Instead, he prepares Onoka softly for what was to come. It was only after speaking for a long time, in half a dozen sentences, in proverbs and skirting round the subject, and then only Okoye comes to the point. After hearing Onoko's epic reply that our elders say that the sun will shine on those who stand before it, shyness on those who kneel under them. Okoye rolls his coat skin and leaves. Achati has purposefully interspersed the text with Igbo words, proverbs, and folk tales. Both show their beauty and to bend English language to such an extent that it becomes a suitable medium for us to be express the inexpressible. We have many Igbo words mentioned in Things Fall Apart, as if to slowly boost our vocabulary of Igbo. At times, utterly brilliantly replaces the English words with the Igbo ones. At one point, the word Viditi, which means elders, is mentioned. Next time, Achti replaces the English word elders with the Igbo word Niditi. Thus, Okanko tells his wife, when did you become one of the Niditi of Umofia? It is important to note here that Achti portrays the Igbo culture in its totality, depicting both the good as well as the bad. For example, Igbo people highly privilege the hyper-masculine concept of an ideal man and denigrate the feminine. Women overall are considered of little value even as they have the goddess Eni, the owner of all land, worshipped, and priestess of Akbala, obeyed. Pertinently, beating a woman was not considered bad, but beating her in the week of peace was something that was evil. To call somebody a woman was the ultimate insult one could inflict on the other man. Okanko calls Osugo a woman because he had contradicted him at a meeting, and he had no title. It is written that Okanko knew how to kill a man separate. Okanko's identity is formed according to his community perception. He disliked his father because he was not what the community valued. Things like war, action, hard work. It is said that Onoka was never happy when it came to wars. He was in fact a coward and could not bear the sight of blood. The cultural connection is already given. Anyone who couldn't bear the sight of blood was a coward. He was known as such to everyone, hence the priestess of Akbala shouted at him, saying, "You, Onaka, are known in all the clans for the weakness of your mashik and your hope." This general perception of Onoka as weak was something that Okanko dreaded the most, more than evil, capricious gods, magic, or forest. Hence, his hypermasculinity is put as a reaction to what Onoka, his father, was thought to be. So to prevent himself from his father's image, Okanko constructed himself as a man who was rude and abusive to his wives and children, and who made himself love wars, blood, and violence. It is said about him, perhaps down in his heart, Okanko was not a cruel man. There are other unacceptable things like the practice of abandoning twins in the evil forest because they are considered evil. We have murder of a woman from one village compensated by an exchange of a young man and a girl from another village. And who can forget one of the most unfortunate scenes in arguably whole literatures of the world, where Ikimifuna, the innocent boy brought to Umofia in order to compensate a murder, is killed by Okanko himself after having raised him as his own son for 3 years. Only to
Safia,
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Safia,
Yes,
can
ma'am.
you conclude, please? No.
Okay, ma'am.
Can
Okay.
you conclude?
Okay, ma'am. I will conclude. To conclude, I would like to say that Things Fall Apart can be considered as a groundbreaking indigenous novel as it deals with the myriad cultural representations of the Igbo people and the subsequent disintegration of their innate unified cultural norms and beliefs. It transformed the literary scene and led to the reinsurgence of manifestation and pride in indigenous culture. Thank you very much.
the participants, if they have any questions, they can drop into the chat box. Now, may I call upon Dr. Bhumika Sharma. She is Assistant Professor, Department of English, School of Humanities and Languages, Central University of Rajasthan, Bandra, Sindri, Ajmer, India. And the title of our presentation is Echoes in Ebonics, the indigeneity of being black. In Hudson's, their eyes were watching God. So now, Bhumika Sharma. Bhumika Sharma, can you please unmute yourself? We are not able to hear you, Bhumika. Yes? Hello? Hello? Bhumika Sharma. Bhumika. There's an option at the bottom. What's the problem then, Bhumika? Bhumika, Bhumika. Hello, Bhumika. Hello. Yes, Bhumika. We are not able to hear you, Bhumika. Where is the problem? Bhumika, should I go for another presentation? By the time you just go with it, please check up lab volume. Bhumika, we are not able to hear you. Messages, let us see the messages. What are the connection? I can do one thing. By the time, Bhumika, you can set up the things. May I call upon the next paper presenter? Is he there? It is Dr. S. Shobana.
Yes, ma'am, I'm there, ma'am.
Is the presenter over there? Yes. Yeah. She is Assistant Professor of English, Department of English, the Standard Fireworks. Rajaratnam College for Women. It is Sivakasi. And the title of the presentation is From an Indigenous Culture to Civilization, a study of the Cherokees in the Cherokee Rose, a place to call home. So now I call upon Dr. S. Shobana to make her presentation. Dr. S. Shobana, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Very good afternoon to one and all present here. First of all, let me thank that this conference is indeed a great attempt in the field of learning and enhancing the outlook of research. And it was a great opportunity being a part of this conference. Now, let me start my presentation. So, my topic, From an Indigenous Culture to Civilization, a study of the Cherokee in Cherokee Rose, a place to call home. Let me get into my topic now. Cherokee Rose is a good story and a great way to learn about a historical event we would rather swipe under the rug, said by Lawrence Snelling. Long captive with the study of American history, Al and John Lassie eagerly researched the time of the 18th century when the 5 civilized tribes were forced by the US government to make a 1,000-mile journey to Indian Territory, now the state of Okalamho. The tribes were the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Cocteau, the Cree, and the Seminole. Repeatedly forced to surrender their lands, the people of Cherokee nations, as well as those of the other 4 tribes, were hoping to find Indian Territory a place to call home. Moving to the next slide. There are many influential Cherokee people who made up a way for the Cherokees to rebuild their broken, displaced life. The story of Cherokee Rose, a place to call home, is thereby a story of overcoming struggle, a powerful tale of suffering and clashes of identity of a generation of Native Americans that assimilates towards a new home in Okalama and finally found a place to call home. The issues that accompany the native ways of Indian guidance through the insufferable inventions and the domineering treatment that many people have tried experimentally on the Cherokees. This study, this research on the Cherokee people is aimed at presenting the injustice of culturally and ethically superior group who practice what they preach. This study focuses on merely the history and the facts and provide a revelation into Cherokee's thought, moral, codes, duties of the people. The Cherokee usually began their stories the way their ancestors have for generations through oral history. The native people tribe choose to call themselves as the Eniuvian, which means the leading people or the principal people. But the term Taxagi, which means Cherokee, is mostly used to refer this indigenous group of people. The Cherokee, one of the 5 civilized tribes, occupied a large portion of territories in southern eastern United States of America, such as North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. They lived in a separate life, earning their livelihood through hunting, gathering, foraging in the Smokies or the Great Smoky Mountains. They were one within their choose clans and with the nature. The cultural history of the Native American forms the basic of the role performed by the men and women of their tribes. The native way of live life was slightly different to what is practiced today. The Cherokee and the numerous other Indian tribes were basically an agrarian community, practicing agriculture since the first European contact. Their ways of living was dedicated by nature. Nature's bounty was all they ever knew. Their culture extended back to the time where men hunted for the clothing and women whatever they could use as implement, tools and vessels. Hunting was much a part of Cherokee history, and it is necessary for them for food and to appease the spirit during ceremonial days. The culture of the Cherokee is filled with the relics of and the hunting parties skilled with the use of their weapons. While hunters made use of the handmade weapons such as the bowguns, bows, arrows, and the animal traps, nets, spear, the women used gardening tools also handmade to harvest their field. They worship all of life, including saying a prayer for every herb or flora they plucked to every animal they hunted. The superstitious belief of the Cherokee people enabled them to build a profound faith in the universe and in a supernatural power of a supreme being who created the world. In cultural terms, ethnicity plays a huge role in capturing the vastness of the ancestry of the people. The Cherokee ancestors were people trained in the ways of the earth. They were warriors, hunters, farmers, healers, wise ones, and the shaman who controlled the vision for the village. The clan system made up the cultural community of the many native tribes. The clan themselves each had their own separate and varying rituals and practices. The Cherokees, before they were greeted by Christian missions, were basically a ceremonial people who were deeply ritualistic and made sure blessing from the god were shielded and the Shannak teaching accepted and warning adhered to them. Since before European contact, the Cherokees were established craftsmen as evident when in the 15th century the Cherokee were living in houses made by interweaving cane in a curricular framework and a pasture of mud to smoothen the covering. The houses in each of the clan consisting of 60 closely clinged family atmosphere. The headman or the chief or the uka, the king. They call the headman and the chief as uka, meaning the king, preside over each clan along with council member. By the 18th century, Cherokee were grounded in the practice of medicinal herbs and grew plants that benefited their needs as well as the need for sacrifice and for other cultural practices. They grew a varieties of tree for fuel, used the weaves of the barks and twigs for marketing basket, tribes twined medicine from the barks and frameworks for the building. The culture of Cherokee had a clear separation of tasks for men and women, both. The Cherokee men were warriors, as I said earlier, hunters and providers of meat, animal skin for clothing, and performed the role of a protector of his clan. The women, on the other hand, were the farmers and agriculturists. They cultivate the land for food in the summer with both herbals and floral varieties of garden products. Each woman had her own garden where they harvest their own meals and exchange produce among the villagers. Next slide explain about the things which they used everyday life. The Cherokee people used in everyday life. The Cherokee believed in the power of small and in small deeds. Even in the cultural scenario of Cherokee life, where artifacts and jewelry made up a good portion of their ancestry. The Cherokee take pride in making some beautiful irrespective of its eventual degradation. Each and every article created meant something to someone. Jewelry was used to show a connection with a group or a clan. Beads were a big part of Cherokee jewelry. Beads were also used by the Cherokee as a form of currency. When it came to art and craft, the Cherokee's talent knew no bounds. All handmade pieces, the Cherokees excelled in artistic field. The trees that were cut down were made use of through the wooden cannons, home poles, fences around the villages. The land were clean for plantation for harvesting crops. They were made clay plots, cart pipes, cannon, rattles, basket, beads, and their own clothing as well. They were very handy, never even stopping to use potter wheels for making their pots and vessels, but rather shaped them all with just their palms and flow of creativity connection within the Cherokee people. They were all craft pipes from clay, wood, and the soft also. The pipes were used for ceremonial purpose and were therefore taken extra with the decoration. Masks were also form of another part. Masks form another instinct part of native culture. Their warrior would wear scary looking masks and just at the enemy fear. The masks were also worn before a warrior went out to battle. The warrior would dance around the weaving the mask and laugh. This kind of mask was known as the Booger mask. The Cherokee created their own dye and material for the product of nature. Light brown to dark brown were created using the walnut essence. Orange was created from the bloodroot. Yellow, rusty color were taken from the yellow onion skins. And dark mauve from the pokeberry and astronaut of the berries and the fruit. Another important symbol is the eagle feather. The eagle feather was a wing symbol for the Native Americans. The bird was chosen out for all the rest because of their strength and bravery. It is a symbol for what are the bravest, highest, and strongest. The eagle feather was treated with a great respect and given to others to show their honor, and worn with dignity and pride. When the eagle feather were held over someone's head, it was a symbol of the bravery of the person, and they were wished all the happiness, peace, and prosperity in the world. Rattles were both used for dance and to scare away evil spirit and bad omen. It was also used to invite the attention of the good spirit roaming the world. Some were made of turtle shellfish with the corn sermon, some others grouts and swashes. Tattoo is the important thing in that. Tattoo and body painting were quite common in the Cherokee peoples, native peoples. Men commonly have many decorative tattoos on their body and faces. Let me move to the next slide. which speaks about the woman. Native Cherokee women. Native Cherokee culture greatly esteemed the woman in the clans. And long before European arrivals, the Cherokee women enjoyed major roles. The women were the head of the Cherokee houseland, controlled the children, and were fighters respective of the system of ancestry and the bloodline. When a child was born in the Cherokee clan, he or she automatically
Doctor-
became a part of. Yes, ma'am?
Dr. Shobana, yes. Can you please conclude?
Yeah, sure, ma'am, definitely. So as I told you, the women make a major part of this. After that, the Cherokees have a 7 ancient religious ceremony. Those are the new moon of spring, the 7 corn ceremony, the ripe corn ceremony, the great new moon ceremony, the new moon ceremony, the bonding death ceremony, and the youth dance. All these ceremonies have a history behind it. So as the time is very constrained, I'm just telling the ceremony's name and moving forward to the conclusion that Cherokee, the culture emphasizes more on their cultural means of living and form a bond with the elements. The culture of Cherokee spoke of tribal ancestries and it closed with the everything around the world. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, thank you. May I now call upon Dr. Bhumika Sharma?
May I
Yes,
audible?
Bhumika Sharma, are you there?
May I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
Yeah, you are audible.
I would
Bhumika.
like to share my screen, so I'm trying to connect it with my PPT.
Okay. You may go ahead.
Yeah. Is it visible now?
No, it's not visible.
Is my PPT visible?
It's taking time, Bhumi. Wait for some time, huh?
Okay.
You may start with your presentation, Bhumika.
Okay, I'm
Your
actually.
screen is shared.
Okay, screen is shared. Fine. Let me see. Because I'm not able to see the screen now. I don't know. There is some problem in the connection. Is it visible now?
Why don't you?
Okay.
Yeah, it's been done.
Okay,
It's been
fine.
done.
My paper is titled Echoes and Ebonomics, and it's basically a linguistic analysis of the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's a novel which is written by Zora Neale Hurston, and it was published in 1937, and it is also considered as a classic of Harlem Renaissance. So basically, the novel is a story of Black women from southern United States. So earlier it was criticized on many grounds, but later through the Black Studies program and MLA seminars, it was restored, and especially by the efforts of Alice Walker, who tried to bring this major Black American writer at the forefront. And later it was included in the Time in 2005 list of 100 best English language novel. And even the latest in 2019, you would see that it was included in the 100 most influential novels by BBC. So that shows even the contemporary relevance of this work. So here, when you go through the text, you would find that there is a specific African American voice that is heard. You know why I'm using this word heard? Because you will be reading the novel, but you would find the echoes of that sound, which is somewhere drawing upon the indigenous speech pattern of those blacks. Because basically, they came from Africa, they were uprooted, they were displaced, and then later gradually assimilated into American culture. So even after Americanization, over the years, you would find that their language still echoes that speech pattern of ethnicity, which perhaps they carry in their blood, in their culture, which remain the integral part of their identity. So the novelist uses a very, you can say, a strategic way to bring that Black indigeneity back into that African identity in the African part of the African American. So I think I'm clear with this idea that they are African American, but their roots are reflected into that African part of it, despite this later part of the American that shows their gradual Americanization. So the novel is set into a black town, Eatonville. It's a completely black town, and here the moment the author uses this setting, then it opens a scope for the using of black tongue. All the characters talk in their local speech pattern, which they are carrying as a part of their speaking culture. And at the same time, the author also intersperses the third person narrative voice, which is basically the standard American English. So you would see that there is a juxtaposition of these two types of English which emerge. One is the standard American English, that is a part of the larger academic discourse and media discourse, and then this Ebonics, the community speech, which is echoing the sound pattern of their African languages, indigenous languages. You never know the source, it's a Yoruba or something else, but this this sound pattern, and similarly the experimentation with the inflectional morphemes and also they all get reflected into the speech pattern of this novel. And especially the novelist has preferred to write it in the communicative mode. Instead of putting it into just the description form, you will find that this whole novel is written into the conversation form, where we have two participants, Jenny Crawford, the female protagonist, and her friend Phoebe Watson. So they would be talking about, Jenny's life, and this way the things would come out, the action would come out. So there is recurring shift, and that shows that social variation that has taken place there in the language of the Black community. But at the same time, this social variation defines a speech community. So these Black people can have a group solidarity among themselves, where as a group of people, they share a set of norms, same expectations regarding the use of language. And so their language, their speech pattern features the local version, which may be very conveniently discarded by the, let's say, mainstream by stating like non-standard language. But they can some kind of low prestige also, which is assigned by the mainstream society. But there is the covert prestige which is enjoyed by the Black community when they talk in Ebonics. And this is also called, Ebonics is also known as AVI, that is African American Vernacular English. So all those stylistic and phonological variations are visible into that into the text of the novel. So if you can see my slide, then you will see that, I have quoted certain example. In fact, I have mentioned the page numbers also. Like you can see the very first line is 64, 172 and all. So I have quoted number of the example from the text, which would give you the idea that how the phonetic variations of this English language, which has come because of their indigenous speech pattern, which they had been using at one point of time. The generations have gone, but even after this generational gap in their English, you can see that phonetic features and grammatical features and syntactical features, which are drawn upon the upon this local community speech pattern. So here you would see that when I investigated it, using that linguistic frame, then I found many variations of this kind, like the sound of AVI, that how these phonetic variations are reflected in the speech pattern of Black community. So I'll just give you the example, like there is a tendency to reduce the final consonant cluster. At the end, if there are, more than one or two consonants, then in their speech pattern they would reduce it. So left hand will sound as left hand. So these last two consonants are dropped. So in that way, the girl become girl and never become neb. So this way the last consonant sound is dropped, and that is basically the reducing of the consonant cluster. Similarly, they drop the past tense ed pronunciation also. So again, I am giving you the example where the told become told. So the sound is dropped. Similarly, there's a very consistent pattern of the using of the dental consonant. So in standard English, you have the th sound and the sound. But when these Black community people would be talking to each other, in their English, they would be using dental consonant, very differently, because these dental consonants are converted into either alveolar stop consonant sounds or labiodental fricative sound. So th become t. So means think become tink, and the become the. So that become that. So this kind of conversion of the dental consonant into alveolar stop or labiodental fricative consonants can be seen in the novel, which is basically reflecting the speech pattern of the Black community. And there are multiple examples, like you can see the next slide, where I have given the example of mouth. So instead of mouth, the writer gives you the mouth, so that is the sound. So same example, like subject becomes subject. So because we have limited time, so I would not read all the sentences, but you can see these changes, like Mr. So Mr. R sound dropped. Going to, so in between G sound dropped. Little become lil, so T sound dropped. Children become children, so Dr sound dropped. This is basically, you know, reflecting the phonetic variations in Ebonics, which is used by the Black people for their in-group communication. So there are other examples like this. D picture is right up there, so this is the sound which is converted into the sound. So that way it goes. Without taking much time, I'll go for the morphological features, which perhaps would give you an idea that what kind of speech patterns are used here at the level of morphology. So there is the tendency of dropping the inflectional morphemes, like John's friend, so it would be called John friend. So they don't use the standard American English apostrophe S in their pronunciation. So again, there are examples. Similarly, third person singular S, which is used with the verb form, that is also dropped. Similarly, plural marker S is also dropped. But interestingly, you would find that in this novel, the plural marker is retained to a great extent. So perhaps, you know, the writer tries to show that how the standard American English feature also gets assimilated with their indigenous, morphological features or phonetic features that shows their cultural blending that is reflected into their language. But there is, a huge number of examples that show the non-standard use of inflectional morpheme in the African American vernacular English. So these are the examples. So you can see that how you wants, we don't use second wants S with the second person you. And similarly, they needs. In the third point you can see, so they is plural, third person plural. So the standard American English is they need, but they use they need. So that is a morphological feature that is reflected here. So you looks and folks plural with the treasures. So that way you will find plenty of examples that how in Ebonics there is a non-standard use of the inflectional morpheme. Now, similarly, we can see the variations in the grammar also. In grammar, the most prominent feature of the Ebonics is the use of double or multiple negatives, double multiple negative construction. So generally in the standard English, when you use two negative words, they cancel each other. But in Ebonics, there is use of two negative forms and that reinforces each other. So you have the sentences like, I ain't know nothing. You don't mean no harm. And similarly, other example. So that way, this double or multiple negative construction also becomes a unique feature of African American vernacular English that differentiates it from the standard American English. Now, the formation of the negative version is done with the help of like ain't or don't instead of doesn't. So again, there is deviation from the from the standard English in their speech pattern. Ebonics tense forms also differ. And you would find, if I enumerate just a few features of that, the absence of the verb to be in the sentence. So in standard English, generally, he is busy. You will be using is as the linking verb here. But there is zero copula in Ebonics because they say he busy. And he busy, he playing ball, that refers to the continuous sense. So this way, sometimes the overhearer would be getting confused at what the person is saying. But the in-group, they are able to understand each other because they have their own specific linguistic features of their local speech pattern or communicative speech pattern. Very interesting example of this grammatical variation is the use of habitual be. He be busy or he be playing ball. So, the overhearer would think he be playing ball means he is playing ball. But that does not mean he is playing ball right now. He be playing ball means he plays ball. It's a recurrent feature, kind of habit. So they use be to denote the habit. And this is a completely different kind of the grammatical feature which is present there in the Ebonics. And similarly, the use of been also, that is also very different, like he been busy. So it refers to, again, the he has been busy together or, some action which occurred in the past or which started during the past and then again, continuing till now. And similarly, they use done also in that sentence, like grandma done been long. So these examples show that how at the grammatical level also their structures differed from the standard American English. Another feature is, use of it in.
Dr.
Yeah,
Bhumika.
yeah. Should I conclude? Am I running short of time?
Yes.
Am,
Yeah, ma'am.
am I
Yes,
audible?
please do conclude.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you are audible, ma'am. Please
Okay,
do
fine.
conclude, ma'am.
Okay, fine. I'll come to the last slide then. I'll just tell you that how the use of Ebonics in this Black community shows that they retain that, indigenous phonetic patterns and those style, syntactic patterns there in the language. So this town itself becomes an example of this group solidarity of the Black people. So you can see, to conclude, like this language which is used by Zora Neale Hurston shows that indigeneity which is still retained there, maybe to very less extent, but still it is there, it is visible in their language, and that gives a very specific identity to these people. So excessive use of H sound, just you can see like Tuesday, to a coming today, to, and all. So just read it out, that's there in the slide. Similarly, final pronunciation of ing is also dropped, and there's a huge Black lexicon which they have generated with the varied spelling like kin, get, care. So you can see that how cn can become ki and kin. So the pronunciation and the spelling both differ. So now this is my last slide, and I would like to conclude on the note that this oscillation between the standard American English and Black vernacular shows that how important it is to control one's language, because that gives you identity. And African Americans, are able to retain that identity feature despite their Americanization and despite their assimilation into the mainstream culture, but they have a unique identity. And that's why perhaps, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is a wonderful, African American scholar and critic, says that this novel by Zora Neale Hurston gives you that what is basically a Negro way of saying. So on this note, I conclude, and thank you so much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Bhumika.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yes. May I now call upon the next presenter, Sai Mili S. Are you there? Hello. Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Sai Mili S.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I
We have
audible?
our next paper presenter as Sai Mili S. She is assistant professor on contract, VNS College, Konni, Pathamanthitta, Kerala, India. And the title of the presentation is Bhama's Karukka as caste testimonial autobiography. So I call upon Saimili S to make her presentation. Please
Can
go
you hear
ahead.
me? Good afternoon,
Well,
all.
ma'am.
Good afternoon, all. Here, I'm going to present a topic based on subaltern studies, and it is entitled as Bhama's Karukku, a caste testimonial autobiography. Unfortunately, it starts with a strong rejection. My paper starts with a strong rejection, and it is like this. I reject your culture. I reject your Parameshwar-centered tradition. I reject your religion-based literature. It is actually taken from a Marathi Dalit poem. The root of the term Dalit can be traced back to the Purisuta of Rigveda, where we find the first reference of caste system. According to Rigveda, Brahmins were born from the mouth of Brahma, the Vaishyas from his thighs, and Shudras from his feet. Hence, Brahmins are the most superior and the Shudras are the most inferior in the hierarchy. The Brahmins have established the theories that the caste system is God-made and not man-made. In the subsequent ages, Manu, an ardent supporter of the caste system, made it in a court in his Manusmriti. The division on the basis of the class is a universal phenomenon, but the characteristics of Hindu caste system is that it is literature based on birth and not on aptitude. Because of the rigidity of the caste system, Shudras are considered as outcasts, downtrodden, polluted, marginals, and are exploited by the higher caste for centuries. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the father of Dalit movement, rejected the notion that the caste system is God-made. The observations about Dalit literature clearly establish the fact that Dalit literature has a separate identity from the mainstream. The hopes and aspirations of the exploited masses, the problem of untouchability, the exploitation of Dalit women by the higher caste men are the themes of Dalit literature. The aim of Dalit writer is to expose the evil of caste system and injustice done to them by the higher caste system. The Dalit writers write what they see, feel, and think in the Indian social environment. The language of the mainstream literature presents the romantic view of life, while Dalit literature represents the realistic view of life. T.S. Eliot's theory of objective correlative or experimental use of myth and allusions is not found in Dalit poetry. Dalit literature rejects canonical literature. It also rejects the established standards of evaluating literature, that is, aesthetics. The purpose of traditional literature is to provide the aesthetic pleasure, though traditional aesthetics talk about the three basic principles of literature: Satyam, that means truth; Shivam, that means goodness; and Sundaram means beauty. It is never realistic. On the contrary, Dalit literature is based on reality, and for it, man is superior even to God or the nation. It rejects Western theories like Freud's psychoanalysis, Barth's structuralism, or Derrida's deconstruction theory. It also rejects Indian theories of Dasa and Dhwani. While dealing with the trends of Dalit literature, the writer will make a humble attempt to point out the core issue of its ideology. Dalit literature questioned the mainstream literary theories and upper caste ideologies that explored and neglected aspects of life. It is experience-based. This anubhava or experience takes precedence over anumana or speculations. The subaltern consciousness and the Dalit and the tribals have not been taken seriously. It is true that we should articulate it as it exists among the Dalits and tribals. The subaltern consciousness should represent the consciousness of an oppressed nationality in our country. This consciousness is of anger, rejection, and protest of the existing dominant socio-economic, political, and religious situations in India. In post-colonial theory, the term subaltern describes the lower classes and the social groups who are at the margins of the society. A subaltern is a person rendered without human agency by his or her social status. Nonetheless, the literary critic and theoretician Gayatri Spivak advised against the too broad application of the term because subaltern is not just a classy word for the oppressed or the other, but for somebody who is not getting a piece of bread. So this is about the subaltern consciousness prevalent in India. Now we can go through the chapter or the paper or the book. Bhama, Faustiana Fatima Rani, hails from a Dalit Roman Catholic community in Tamil Nadu and is not a writer by choice. She became a nun out of desire to do something for the people, but experienced oppressive caste discrimination in the convent too. After 7 years in the convent, she walked out disillusioned with the church and happened to meet Father Mark Stephen, who hailed from her village, Padupatti, had known her since her childhood. Though not a Dalit himself, Father Mark was actively involved in the Dalit Christian movement that later became the chief of Dalit Christian Liberation Movement. He was sympathetic to Bhama's tragic story of suffering and disillusionment and encouraged her to put down her experiences in a written narrative. Karuku in 1992 and Sangadi in 2005 came out of that supportive encounter. Bhama's debut work, Karuku, considered to be the first Dalit autobiography in Tamil, is an unconventional work that defies categories. It has been variously described as a testimonial, a confession, manifesto, and autobiography. Bama belongs to the class of first generation learners in her community and has found a place in academic circles by virtue of being a school teacher and, more significantly, as a writer. She gives a great emphasis on education as means of social empowerment. As an activist writer, she forges close ideological affinity with feminist thought. Women and Dalits are both oppressed groups, oppressed on account of their birth. She also consciously writes about the Dalits in Dalit's own vocabulary, refusing to follow traditional notions of form, style, aesthetic paradigms, or acceptable forms of diction and grammar. Bama, one of the chief literary figures in Dalit literature, questioned the marginalization of women. Her autobiographical work, Karuku, deals with the caste-based discrimination prevalent in the Indian society. In this novel, she reveals the brutal honesty of the elite and the plight of Dalits in caste-ridden society. Even religious conversion doesn't solve the Dalit question to satisfaction. In Karuku, the narrator gives an elaborate sketch of the game played by children in the Pinya village. The boys of the colony act as naikas or upper caste landlords, and the girls follow suit as panias or the farmhands. Alternately, the boys would pretend to keep shop and the girls would buy grocery from them. The boys would pose as priests, the girls would submit as sisters. The boys would act as a drunken husband returning home, and the girls as wailing wives receiving the blows. Thus, even at play, Dalit girls are located in a subordinate position. In relation to Dalit boys, the girls are placed as victims, as passive receivers who would be counted upon to legitimize the male authority as husband, as landlord, or as priest. As a therapeutic effort, Bama has written Karuku. As she says, Karuku is written by a wounded self, has not been dissolved in the stream of time. On the contrary, it has been a means of relieving the pain of others who are wounded. Lakshmi Holmstrom, the translator of Karuku into English, says that it was written out of specific experience, the experience of a Tamil Dalit Christian woman. Yet it has a universality at its core. Yes,
Am I
ma'am?
audible?
Audible, ma'am.
Yeah, please conclude.
Okay,
Please
okay, ma'am.
conclude, ma'am.
Okay. So, to sum up, Karuku is a path-breaking literary text which reveals the variegated responses of the people of the marginalized group. While some are meek and others are vociferous and rebellious, just like Bama. Bama, at the end in the Karuku, confesses that I describe myself in Karuku as a bird whose wings had been clipped. Now I feel like a falcon that trends the air high in the sky. So I hope this paper attempts to study this literary text under the light of subaltern studies, and hopefully this work may make a change in the society, and especially in the case of subaltern aboriginals, the oppressed people. Thank you all.
Thank you, Simili. Now, may I call upon Avantika Chakravarti? Is she there?
Yes, ma'am.
Avantika
Thank you.
Chakravarti?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, Avantika Chakravarti is a PhD research scholar, Folklore Research Department, Guwahati University. The title of her presentation is The Transformation of a Folk Theatre, a study of Gambhira with the aid of performance theory. So I call upon Avantika Chakravarti. Avantika Chakravarti, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everybody present here, ma'am. I would like to share my screen as I have a PPT.
Yeah, you may go ahead. Avantika, you may go ahead.
Yeah.
I request others to please unmute? Please mute. Avantika.
Yeah. So the topic of my presentation today is the transformation of a folk theatre, a study of Gombhira with the age of performance art. So at first I will introduce you all to the folk theatre form of Bengal, Gombhira. Gombhira actually originated from Nawabganj of Bangladesh. It's equally popular in Malda district as well as some other districts of West Bengal, that is North and South Dinajpur, and partially in Murshidabad. It is basically performed on the 14th April, and that is also the last day of Bengali year, and that is considered as the Chaitra Sankranti as well. The same day, we actually celebrate Gajon festival, which we celebrate to worship God Shiva. What makes the Gambhira very exclusive is the subject. Gambhira doesn't focus on mythology like other theatrical forms of Bengal. It basically focuses on the socio-political issues like power hegemony, social indiscipline, panchayat raj, administrative nuisance, political menace, etc. The theatre form is basically performed by Rajbangshi, Koch, Mahali tribes of West Bengal, along with Hindus and Muslims. One thing is mentioned worthy here that this theatrical form is secular in nature, as Muslim performers also perform there. Another thing is mentioned worthy that there were some characters in this theatrical forms like Shiva, which were basically Hindu god, and later with the introduction of Muslim performers, this Shiva character changed into Nana. Nana actually symbolizes the eldest member of the society, and he actually gives solution to the problem of the social problem of the mass, which previously when Hindus used to perform it, it was basically Shiva at that time. Shiva used to play the character and he used to solve the problem. The most exclusive thing about Gombhira is the report section. Am I audible, ma'am? Hello?
Yeah, you are audible. You may go ahead.
The thing is that,
Hello?
yeah.
Ma'am, you are audible.
Thank you.
You may go ahead. No problem.
The exclusivity of Gombhira is the report section. Here in this section, the performers actually give the local news to the mass, to the audience who are watching it. The aim of this paper is to see how Gombhira is losing its originality, whether it is losing its originality for being popular, as this is very popular in Bengal now. So now we will go directly into the theoretical and conceptual framework. Eminent folklorists like Frank J. Corum and Dr. Peter J. Klaus have advocated that a performance cannot be repeated. So it is of fleeting character. Performance studies scholar Richard Skechner told that performance is a kind of communication embedded in aesthetics, text, and context, which means to study performance, text, and context is indispensable. On the other hand, Alan Dundas, the celebrated folklorist, has argued that lore cannot be studied without the folk. Here, folk is the context. He has advised the folklorist to analyze folklore from three levels, which are text, context, and texture. Dunban Amos has also confirmed that a system or context regulates or influences the folk art. So we will see what are the text, context, and texture. Text is basically the oral presentation in a performing art, which has been performed or narrated in the event. Context is the total social milieu which is associated with the performance, the social relationship, the identities, the audiences, the performers, everyone who is associated with it. Along with that, the place where it is getting performed, the performance place, that can be temporal, that can be spatial. Both are very significant and important as the context. The age, sex, the pretext or the occasion or the ritual associated with it, the time and the place, as I told, is very important in case of context, and all this togetherly will be considered as a context. The texture is the quality of the text. It is everything and anything that is associated, that actually reflects in the action of the performance. It includes the linguistic aspects like dialect, idiolect, the entire episodical configuration of the performance, the lyrical and dialogue coexistence, etc. Actually Gombhira has 6 episodes, which are preface or Mukhopat, Bandhana invocation, duet, Chariari, Palabondigan, and report. So what happens, as I told before, that most of this episode actually addresses social issues, except this one. That's why I have taken these lyrics here. The lyrics of Duet here, on the episode of Duet, a male and a female character comes upon the stage, and they can be father or daughter, they can be husband and wife, and they interact. And it is most of the time humorous in nature, but obviously along with that, there are some intonation of family problems associated with it. Also social problems sometimes. In case of report, what happens, they actually address some social issues which is going on around here. This lyrics actually telling in the Malda district hospital, there is no lady doctor. So the female patients are going through a problematic phase. They are going through, they don't have any lady doctor to check them. So the performer is asking the audience to demand for a lady doctor in the hospital. In the next thing, what I will talk about is the subject of the text. This is also very important as a set text. As I told, the text of or the subject of the text does not refer to mythology in any way. It basically deals with social, family-oriented, political, administrative, natural. Natural means it's kind of like they talk about the famine, the heavy rainfall, whatever is actually affecting the harvest, something like that. Also the religious and geographical aspects sometime, and local news, obviously. So this totally concludes the text, and here comes the context. So as I told, the performer community, their age and everything actually makes the context. But the most important thing is the place, performance place. Here we can see the circular picture in between. That is the right side. The rectangles are the instrument players, and the triangle, black triangles, are the singers. The small dots or the small circles around, those are the audiences. The temple is not, and the green room is far away from the stage. So the performers actually go through the audience to reach the stage. So this actually creates a context of the stage. And one thing is mentioned over here, traditionally Gombhira doesn't have any stage. They used to perform it on the ground, but now it is changing, and they are creating elevated stages which are not even circular in nature. They're basically rectangular or square sometimes. So this is the texture of Gombhira, which I told, the configuration, the episodical configuration of the theatrical form. So we will directly go to the evolution of Gombhira. So according to Richard Skechner, he went into a concert in Brooklyn Academy of Music. Richard Skechner saw that organizers were asking the hired audience to not applaud, as the performance of Darwish is ritualistic in nature. Or slyly, the audience were assured that they are watching an authentic form. But it's not only in West. He had seen Bengali and other folk ritual on concert stage in India before hired audience. Similarly, in China, Mexico, and Cuba, he witnessed rituals getting reframed as aesthetics performance. The same can be seen in case of Gombhira as well. The next slide will discuss that evolution of Gombhira. So the first evolution which we will talk about, we will take the original context of Gombhira. Here what happens, we can see in the picture, as I told you, the performance place it is the same, right? So this is the original context of Gombhira. The original area is Malda. The time is Chaitra Sankranti. It is getting performed in Chaitra Sankranti. The people who are watching it, the audience, they're rural. And the pretext is Gajon. That means ritualistically, it is happening after on the Chaitra Sankranti, just to celebrate Gajon. This is the induced context. This is happening in Malda, but the month or the day of the performance has changed. It's in October, and it was basically an initiative by the government to actually spread awareness about social awareness about some diseases, as much as I remember. So the folk who are watching it are both rural and urban. The pretext, which was Gajon festival, is totally absent here. So this is the induced context. The next is the artificial context. Here we see that there is an elevated stage, and this is this is getting presented in urban area. The time of presentation is December. The community who are watching it is high art urban people, and the pretext is surely absent here. So I will go to the conclusion. A text obviously determines the socio-cultural, economic, linguistic background of the performer and audience. The context is responsible to even determine the genre of the theater, and the texture gives a representation of the aesthetical sense of the mass associated with the performance. So a folk performance cannot be intersected properly if the text, context, and texture is not studied together, because without pretext or the ritualistic arrangement of Gombhira, it will lose its ritualistic authenticity. Performance studies also helps to determine the level of transformation a folk performing art has gone through, which we had just proven in last 3 slides. Determination of the present status of performance clarifies if it is still in its authentic form or it is on the way to become a fake lore. Fake lore is something which is no more a folklore and going towards becoming a popular culture. That means it's losing its authenticity to make itself more popular. Finally, by studying Gombhira with the aid of performance theory, it can be concluded that popularity sometimes results into declination of authenticity of folk performing arts. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have excellent presentations covering up various issues based on indigenous people and various topics that have been covered up by various presenters. So I would be taking up one by one and I would be talking about them, and later on we can have the questions if there are any, or comments or suggestions. As such, if the other audience may have, they can put up into the chat box and we can take up them one by one. So the first paper presenter was Dr. Shafia, and she had been talking about actually her topic was centralizing the marginal. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart and as an indigenous novel. She focused upon the problematics of the indigenous studies, the indigenous identity, especially in the reference to Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. She also mentioned about the Heart of Darkness, and let me also point out here that most of the scholars, they would be taking up Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and make a comparative study of both these texts. She rightly mentioned about the Heart of Darkness over here. She also talked about the folklore, the dance, the Igbo, and especially Okonkwo as a character that has been used, and how there has been an indigenous representation through these through this text, which is named as Things Fall Apart. And most of the time it has been studied as a post-colonial text, but it has been with a new perspective that we can see today, that how it has been included into the indigenous, or how she was able to make a powerful presentation from an indigenous perspective. We have another paper presenter. I would be taking, though we had Shobna as a second presenter, but I would be going up with Dr. Bhumika Sharma first. So she made her presentation on Echoes in Ebonics, the indigeneity of being black in Hudson's, their eyes were watching God. So this was purely, I would say that the presentation was from a linguistic perspective. She had taken up Zora Neale Hudson's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and she talked about the indigenous speech patterns that have been used, the ethnicity, the identity, the African-American, Americanization of them, then how the complete text is based upon two characters' conversation. And that actually is nothing but it brings about the social variations, the speech community that has been highlighted. She has also took various examples from the text itself, even pointing out the page numbers and the dialogues between the two characters, grammatical and syntactical linguistic features, and how it could be taken up into the frame of the phonetic variations. That also was being highlighted by Dr. Bhumika Sharma. She also talked about the African-American vernacular English in the context of this particular text that she has chosen for study. one important aspect was the significant role that is played by the language in maintaining one's identity. And when I had made a presentation in national conferences, there I had made it on the endangered languages. And we need to be very cautious about the languages that are dying. Near about 176 dying languages we have today. So we need to save the language in order to save one's own identity. I mean to say the culture, the literature, the language. If we want to save, we need to save it. So she also rightly pointed out the use of double negatives, though in the English that we speak, we consider it to be wrong. But when she was talking about this vernacular English, it is permissible over there, and how it has been depicted into the text, use of double negatives, and so forth. The next presenter, Dr. S. Shobana. She made it from an indigenous culture to civilization, studies of Cherokees in Cherokee Rose, a place to call home. It was an excellent presentation that was being made by her, because she has took up the text, but she took it as an historical novel, how a lot of research that has been done on the Cherokee. She also mentioned about the 7 clans, who and how the headman or the king was to be named, the medical herbs that are being used, the sacrifice, women representation, art, jewelry. Then it was, I would consider it to be a complete discourse on Cherokee, the currency, the global mass, the native Cherokee's culture, everything that has been mentioned in the text, she could try to cover up. Though I had to again and again for each presenter, that was not something that I liked it, but I have to do it as a part of a chairperson. I had to stop them, or else it could have been a more detailed presentation, because the slides were still left by the presenters. Then we had Simile S. Bama's Kurukku as a caste testimonial autobiography. Our presentation was divided into 2 parts. In the first, how Dalit literature is represented, what are the various issues that are to be taken up in the literature that she pointed out. And secondly, she began it with a strong rejection. The very first line was a line of rejection. Rather, I would consider it to be a line of resistance, because the act of writing itself is a resistance and very strong rejection that was being taken up by the writer. She talked about the culture, religion-based literature. She talked about the Brahmas, the Shudras, the Rigvedas, and the hegemonic dominant structure, so to say, when we talk about the various structures in hierarchy, especially in the Indian context. Then she talked about the Dalit identity, the problems of untouchability, the injustice that is being done upon them. She also talked about the theory of rasa, the ideology, and to some extent, because due to time constraint, again, she could have made it a more detailed presentation on Bama's autobiography, but rather the text was, because of the constraint of time, but still she was successfully able to do justice to the autobiography for that matter. Then a complete discourse, I would consider it to be on Dalit literature as far as the topic is concerned. Then moving on to the last paper presenter, that was Avantika Chakravarti, the transformation of a folk theater, a study of Gambhira with the aid of performance theory. She rightly mentioned about the various she talked about the various issues, okay? Then she talked about Gambhira as a folk theater, social and political. Then she talked about the West Bengal and the Hindus and Muslim. That was something very positive part of it, where she talked about the unity in diversity, for that matter, that how before, when the Hindus, they were taking a particular character, they have represented Shiva, and later on when the Muslims, they were making it up, they made it as a Nana, which symbolizes as a what you can say, the one who can give suggestions. She also talked about the text, the context, and the texture that was being highlighted by the researcher. The social issues were being highlighted by taking up a literary piece from the text, because she talked about everything related. I mean to say, she took it as a piece from the text itself. Then evolution, performance, then artificial context, she talked about it, and through the pictures it was very clear that how the performance was being made earlier and how the performance has been from the natural to the artificial. So that artificial performance was also being highlighted by her. So if there are other questions apart from my own comments on this, I would like to have the questions if anybody is there to raise questions or suggestions, or if you want to contribute a piece of information as far as these presentations are concerned. There have been 5 paper presenters, and all of them, they try to give justice to the topic they have selected. So it's open, the floor is open for questions, for suggestions, or any information, a piece of information that you want to transmit. Yes. Am I audible? Are there any questions? Can I see the chat box, please? In the chat box, can we have questions? Are there any questions? Yes. Yes, are there any questions? Are there any questions? Yes. You may ask the question, ma'am. I can see you. Yes. You are audible. You may go ahead. Yes.
This is from comment right? If there is no question. Can you hear me?
If we are running short of time, may I conclude, ma'am? Hello. Yes. Yes. Hello. Should we conclude the session, because if we are running of time, I think we should conclude then. Yes. Hello. I'm not able to. I'm not able to
Yes,
listen,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I think we are already running late, so it's better to conclude.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So we may conclude the session. So having said and done, may I for the further proceedings, may I hand over to Regan Sylvester. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to chair the session. And there have been excellent presenters, and presentations were being given justice. Okay, thank you one and all.